This is Pantheon Plus, a podcast where we go beyond tights and flights to explore other genres and movies from the past. Each month we'll have a theme. This month, it's my turn, and we are amidst a post-apocalypse. Boy, does this theme seem appropriate. This week we are going to be reviewing John Carpenter's Escape from New York.
If he climbs over the wall, they'll blow him off. If he tries to fly over the river, they'll shoot him down. If he comes back alone, they'll explode his brain. New York, 1997. One man has 24 hours to break in and break out before it's too late for escape. John Carpenter's Escape from New York. Rated R.
Persons under 17 not admitted without parent or guardian now playing.
My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review, so help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so by following us on Twitter at HeroPantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, we are going back 40 years almost into the past. One of the oldest movies that we have reviewed. I think it might be our second or third or oldest behind the 1966 Batman and the 1978 Superman. But we are reviewing a movie that was made in 1981. And it talked about the very dangerous, futuristic 1997. I guess, Brian, John Carpenter was only off by about 23 years.
Yeah, and I guess in that universe I'd be dead because in the sequel, Escape from L.A., there was that big earthquake and the San Fernando Valley got completely demolished. So in this universe, I am completely dead. But, you know, this universe is still... It's amazing how he put this world building together in the first half an hour, but I think he just did a great job in doing the visuals, and everything about this movie is just so old school, and you mentioned it's one of the oldest ones, and the fact that it's matte paintings and there's almost no CGI. I don't think there's any CGI. It's just like old school computer graphics as a substitute for, the visualization of flying a plane. It's just ridiculous, but it's so much fun. And the plot is ridiculous, but goddamn the performances. We got Donald Pleasance, who's... God, I love Donald Pleasance. I love the Halloween movies to death. And Donald Pleasance is kind of not a big part of my childhood, but he is like a big icon in my head when I think of my childhood and horror movies. And goddamn, do I not think of? Or I always think about that line from Halloween 2. You don't know what death is. Every Halloween, I play Halloween 2. I have the director's cut of Halloween 2. I love fucking Donald Pleasance, and him as the president for 5 minutes in this movie or 10 minutes or whatever. It was fucking great because he just was in a different world in this movie, I think, for those 10 minutes. So, and we got Lee Van Cleef, who I'm a big fan of from the Sergio Leone westerns. I think he's great in For a Few Dollars More. I think he's even better in A Few Dollars More than he is in actually The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which he's also the bad guy in that one. So Lee Van Cleef is amazing in this. And you got Ernest Borgnine as a taxi driver who's just so happy and go lucky and gets it in the end. But still, like an amazing cast put together. You got the usual suspects from all the early John Carpenter years. We even got Nick Castle co-writing the script. Nick Castle was the shape of Michael Myers. He portrayed Michael Myers in the original Halloween. So all these, compadres of John Carpenter coming together, especially with the cast. And then the amazing score as well. So everything's just coming together for a fun 90-minute ride. And yeah, it's only 95 minutes, and I think it's perfect at that length. Anything longer, it would have been too long, but the mood and the atmosphere just makes this movie great.
You mentioned all of those supporting characters and what John Carpenter was able to do with the score, and you did not mention even the lead of this movie, that is Kurt Russell. This is basically Kurt Russell transitioning into the adult portion of his career. If if you can believe it, there was a time when he was a Disney kid. It's amazing to think about, like, when you think about, like, modern Disney kids, like, I would say, like, Zac Efron is kind of a version of that, and Shia LaBeouf to a certain extent. But Kurt Russell was in a number of Disney projects as a tween, as a teenager, and this was kind of his way of throwing those shackles off and doing something else. And it's incredible to think that Kurt Russell has been around for so long. And I think many people might think if this is the start of his career. I mean, it goes back into the early and mid 70s. So Kurt Russell's somebody that we've basically been watching for nearly 50 years. And it's pretty remarkable to think about, like, this as the start of his career, and then where he went throughout the 80s and the 90s as action cinema kind of transitioned to the more muscular Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone. Kurt Russell did kind of carve out a solid career for himself, but it never has felt like he's ever been at the top of the A list. As unfortunate as that is, but this is one of a few collaborations that he and John Carpenter have. Of course, I don't know if the Thing is more famous than this. It might be, depending on which circles you're traveling in, but Escape from New York is one of their early collaborations, and it is an important one because Kurt Russell is playing the person that he believes to be his favorite character, Snake Plissken, a character that he has only played one other time in Escape from LA.
And I have seen Escape from LA, as I mentioned, and he's just as fun in that. But that's more in the later years where John Carpenter was just being more hokey and just, not being as serious and whatever. That's 90s John Carpenter. But in terms of, Kurt Russell, man, if you go on Disney Plus, I think it's all on there. I'm pretty sure every single ABC TV movie or Wide World of Disney movie, all that stuff, the Computer Wore Tennis Shoes. I remember watching that movie for 5 minutes and just being totally just like, what is this? Because I wasn't used to that style of Disney movie. Seeing that in the 90s, from the 70s or 60s or whatever. I think there was another one when I got Disney Plus last year. I watched it for like 5 minutes where Kurt Russell gets like these super strength powers, and it's just the most ridiculous, cheap Disney movie that you can produce. And yeah, it's amazing to see his transition and him as an action star. He's not an A-lister, but he's very reliable. He's almost like a Jason Statham. I don't consider Jason Statham totally an A-lister, but he's definitely like a B-plus player on the action side where you can just count on him for an action role, mid-budget range, get the money back. You know what I mean? Like kind of a movie that you released in September, like his Transporter movies I think came out in September. He's on that level, but when he did stuff in like the 90s with the comedy stuff, I think that kind of elevated him a little bit more. But then again, he kind of had a downturn a little bit. But I think the latest, 10-year run, him working with Tarantino and doing those low budget westerns, I think he's kind of raised the stock a little bit more into this thing where he's become more of a reliable older veteran actor, not necessarily an action star, but he's still reliable in terms of performances. He doesn't have to rely on the action all the time. So I think that's a credit to him and his career. He's never got an Oscar nomination, right? So it's kind of a shame, but I don't know if he can get to that level, but maybe now. I think if you give him the right western and he's the old grizzled veteran, I almost thought he should have got nominated for Hateful Eight, but it was a tough year that year.
Yes, he's also in the very underrated Bone Tomahawk, which is also a very good Western in a similar vein. Of course, we talked about him one other time on our other podcast here at Pantheon because he played an important role in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So he is somebody who has tasted a little bit of the A-list, but not as much as you would think, given the length of his career. But certainly, this was also at a time when John Carpenter had a lot of juice, so to speak. Carpenter had written this film in 1974 as a reaction to the Watergate scandal, but no studio wanted to make it because it was deemed to be too dark and too violent. That, of course, changed with the monumental success of the 1978 movie Halloween, and basically this is the movie that gave John Carpenter the freedom to do a number of other projects, including The Thing as well as this specific movie. This movie only had a budget of $7 million, which for this point was probably more mid-budget. Today it would be very, very low budget. This is the largest that John Carpenter had worked up to at that point nonetheless. Studio executives had wanted Charles Bronson for the role of Snake Plissken, but John Carpenter refused on the grounds that he was too old. Charles Bronson would have also brought a very deep a very different energy to the role that I don't think would have worked out nearly as well. I think it would have almost gone too dark, if you ask me.
Yeah, because I've seen Charles Bronson in Once Upon a Time in the West, and even for a western, and that's also Sergio Leone, by the way. When he doesn't say anything and he's just staring, he's a dark, kind of brooding kind of actor. So yeah, when I read that, I was like, God, I pictured that with the eye patch, and but then again, the whole tone of the movie would just even be darker, I think, and I think you're right because he's that brooding kind of character. I've never seen him in those. What are those? I don't know what they're called. Those revenge cop movies. I forget what they're called.
I don't know offhand. I have fun fact. I've never watched a Charles Bronson movie ever in my life before, mostly because they carry no interest for me. But that they are not my jam.
Yeah, because I keep thinking of Magnum Force, and that's Clint Eastwood, but it's the same kind of thing, just brooding. I think he could have pulled it off in a different decade, maybe the '70s. If they did this in the '70s, yeah, I picture that. It's weird that he says that he wrote the script in the mid '70s with the Watergate scandal, because I feel like I watched this movie again and again, and it just feels like a sequel to The Warriors. I don't know if you've seen The Warriors, but The Warriors has the same vibe of like dark New York grittiness and like fucking spray paint all over the place and the dirtiness and all that stuff, and it just feels like a offshoot sequel of that. And I don't know. In my mind, it's kind of fits, but I know for a lot of people, like, what the hell are you talking about?
I definitely get that vibe as well. I was actually considering us reviewing the Warriors at some point, and after watching this, I kind of wish we had done that. But the Warriors is a fascinating film, and it's definitely one that is worth seeing because it does fit into this theme, and it does feel a lot like a John Carpenter movie, even though it was directed by Walter Hill. So it's a little bit on the different side. I believe the movie that you are referring to is Death Wish, a movie that has since been remade, but that is probably his most famous movie.
Yeah, Death Wish. That's what I'm thinking of because I was thinking like they made a similar movie with Kevin Bacon like 10 years ago with a similar name. I think that was Death Sentence, but that's what I was kind of thinking of. Is it Death Sentence? Is it? Yeah, but still, I think either Kurt Russell at this point in his career was perfect because I think Bliskin in this particular vibe has to be a young kind of cat.
For sure, I agree with you. I think that's the only way this works. The opening narration and the computer's voice in the first prison scene were provided by an uncredited Jamie Lee Curtis. So that's a fun fact, given that Jamie Lee Curtis kind of made her name in Halloween, and then was able to continue working with John Carpenter. She is going to be in another Halloween movie coming up next year. Hopefully, that is a movie that we will actually get to see. And it's funny that we are talking about this, and the week that we're recording this, Jamie Lee Curtis, we're talking about her doing a voiceover. This is the same week that she did a voiceover on the latest season of Archer. She was in the season premiere.
Good for her. I think she's on that kind of comeback train again. She was on that comeback train after H2O, and then it kind of went away. But now I think with the success of Halloween from 2018, because I think that's a big success. You can't deny how extremely profitable that movie was. So, and that's still, I think you got to give some credit to John Carpenter on that one for being the grandfather of it all. But Jamie Lee Curtis, I don't know, man. I think she kind of gets forgotten. But I know we're just a little off topic, but I think with her performance in like A Fish Called Wanda, she showed that she's got it, but something kind of went awry. I don't know. Something got missing, and then she did H2O. But again, I think she's got to ride this train and then kind of go and maybe get a different role. I know she was good in Knives Out from what I heard. So
It's almost as if women, as they get older in Hollywood, are treated very poorly.
yeah, that's unfortunate, and it takes fucking one movie every 5 years to get them back on it, and then they have to go on this fucking cycle again, and it sucks. But hopefully things will change, and hopefully things are changing. So.
All right, so you mentioned Donald Pleasance. He still does have his British accent, even though he is the American president. And there was some discussion about how to correct this, but ultimately they just kind of ignored it and moved on with their lives. It just had Donald Pleasance with his British accent as the president. Another prominent cameo is Ox Baker. He is a professional wrestler. We've made many a wrestling reference across our many podcasts, but in this case it is actually appropriate because Ox Baker does have a cameo in this movie. There was a point when he was apparently hitting Kurt Russell too hard with some of his blows during the boxing ring fight scene. Russell had finally had enough and asked Baker to take it easy and tapped him in the groin to let him know he was serious. And at that point, Baker then calmed down. I don't know about you, Brian, but I've gotten to a point in my movie watching where I see these very slick fight scenes. I'll watch a John Wick, and it's just incredible to see how slick everything looks and how clean everything looks. And then I go and watch this fight scene, Brian, and I mean, it still works for the movie that it is, but it's definitely it's so clunky to watch, especially with the perspective of everything that I've seen over the last few years. So it is an amusing scene, but it's very funny to watch in hindsight, given how much we've improved our ability to choreograph fights.
Yeah, it was definitely an outlaw mud show on the indie level for sure, inside of a gym, no mats, and a gimmick cage with backyard weapons. It was everything that Jim Cornette hated about wrestling, and everything that I don't know. I don't whatever. It's just modern It was just so modern wrestling now. It was hilarious thinking about it. And when you mentioned the clean and slickness of fighting choreographed scenes now compared to this, it's like describing a Young Bucks match as like a fucking John Wick fight choreograph, and then this is like a real Oxbaker match from like 1975 where it's just slow and plodding. So I think that you unintentionally just compared fight scenes to modern wrestling in terms of the in-ring athleticism and all that stuff. But again, we just do these things unconsciously and make these incredible comparisons. But Oxbaker, true legend of the game. But yeah, I think obviously, well, not obvious, but it sounds like that he was going stiff, probably trying to protect the business. This ain't ballet, kid. This ain't fake shit. And went a little too far, probably. And then Kurt Russell's like, ease up, man. I know it's a show. So that's probably what happened. I think it's very much like the Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler thing that got kind of blurred in the lines. But hey, man, that's wrestling. It's always going to get blurred because no one wants to be honest with each other.
Certainly not. The model of the city set was repainted and eventually reused for Blade Runner, which came out a year later. Every character that says, "I heard you were dead" to Snake dies in one of those delicious bits of irony. So those are the notes that I have. Anything else, any other notes that you found or discovered or want to talk about before we go into what still works?
Yeah, especially this latest viewing, everything takes place at night. I just realized that everything takes place at night, and I think that's what adds to the mood to the whole movie because everything is dark and you don't know what's coming around you around the corner, and especially that scene where they're not zombies, but they're just like I don't know, creepy drug addict gang members coming from the sewer and chasing them like zombies, but that whole thing works because it's at night. And I know we talk about, especially with superhero movies, like the best stuff's during the day and the action sequence and stuff, but this is a case where the whole thing is all about the mood and everything takes place at night, so everything just fits. And even the shots that are inside, like interior wise, even when like you see Lee Van Cleef inside with the computers and stuff, all the computers are like dark and everything's dark. You know what I mean? So I think that was very intentional, and I really paid attention to it this time around.
I mean, certainly, I think when you're dealing with tone, I think it's just a matter of are you able to see everything, which I think in this case you are. So I don't think that it is as much of an issue. I think especially when you're dealing with a lot of CGI, I think that's where it becomes an issue because when you do CGI in night scenes, it can become very muddled. And I think that that's one of the reasons that Marvel does a lot of daytime fight scenes is because of the amount of CGI that they're doing. And in this case, I don't think there was any computer usage. My guess is that most of this was in fact done through practical elements. So when I think about the things that work about this movie, I do want to talk about Kurt Russell's performance. I actually have Kurt Russell under both what still works and what doesn't work, and I'm going to talk about it where it is appropriate, why I still think it works. I think that what he is very clearly going for in this movie is he is trying to give a more adult performance and very clearly transitioning as far away from being a Disney actor as possible. And I could totally understand that. And I think that's why it does work because he does, like, I would never be able to guess that this guy was ever in a goofy Disney movie just based on what I saw in this performance. And I think that's why it works. And I think that he is able to do the action. I think he is able. He has that great look The eye patch is a huge contributor to that. But even though he is 30 years old in this movie, it still feels like he's 45 years old. I think he's one of those actors that always, for a while there, he looked older than he was, and he still kind of looks the same now. So now I think he almost looks younger, which is kind of a bizarre thing. But that's what I really appreciated is that Kurt Russell just has the look of somebody who can get things done, but it's not like he's a steroided up Sylvester Stallone in the third Rambo movie or Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Running Man, for instance. He's just a very credible person who just happens to be really good at his job and was a veteran. So that's kind of what he was able to do. So I really appreciated that aspect of his performance.
Yeah, if you like listen to the dialogue, it's not really his delivery because the delivery is kind of dry and kind of low. He's hardly ever yelling, but I think it's really what really sells it is his facial expressions. I think just the way he's kind of got this disdain look, like he doesn't want to be there, but he's a badass and he's got to have this tough face on. And I think one of the best examples of that, and I think John Favreau kind of got this idea too, where you see him on the plane, but it's just his face, and you just got that red light in the background, and he looks like a badass, and he's just got this pissed off facial expression. I think that whole sequence works. And then you kind of see that in 2008 with Iron Man, where they would put that in the same kind of perspective from the Iron Man helmet. I thought that was just a great way to do it because you don't have to show the whole plane; you just show his expression and the way that he's using his facial expressions to show that he's moving the plane and stuff like that. I thought that's perfect. That's the way. That's the way that this performance is kind of like has to go down because the dialogue is not that great. Let's face it. Like as great as Nick Castle is, as Michael Myers, and as John Carpenter is, dialogue is not their strength, right? It's all about the way that the world build and the characters and stuff like that. But the dialogue is kind of dry when it comes to Snake Plissken. You like for me, it's all about what he's doing and the look and all the action. Like I hardly remember the lines of this movie. I more remember the score and just him doing the crazy shit and all the stuff in the background. So it's very much his stoic performance, I think, that works.
And you mentioned the score. I mean, John Carpenter's scores are bangers, straight up. I mean, I don't think that this one gets the credit like Halloween does, but I still think it very much is appropriate and it fits in with kind of the mode of this movie. Brian, we really need to bring synthesizers back and use them on modern scores.
Yeah, because I listen to the John Carpenter station every now and then on Pandora when I'm folding laundry at work at 5 in the morning, which is not creepy at all. But yeah, Stranger Things comes up, and that's been a big comeback with the synthesizer. And I think I'm trying to think. Trent Reznor kind of brought it back. Watchmen soundtrack. Uh, it's kind of coming back. It depends on the artist. But in this case, he just does it so well, and it fits the time. And he does these notes that are so simple, and it's just easy to remember. Dun 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 dun. You know what I mean? It's like dun 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 dun. It's just like something simple, and you remember like a lullaby. And he gets that, and you get that feeling with Halloween and the thing. Somehow he's able to create these scores that are just so memorable and simple. And I think that's what some of these composers that make these other scores get lost and confused. And they have all these like different instruments and these big orchestras, but if you just break it down to like a synthesizer, it's just so much simpler to remember because it's isolated. So I think that's what he was able to figure out and became a genius for making all these soundtracks. It's just he was able to figure out the simplicity of making distinctive themes for each movie. And like you listen to this theme, and I feel like a lot of war movies and like action movies have stolen this theme, especially the specific one from Escape from New York, and just replicated it because you play that over and over, and I hear it and it sounds like one of those Sega Genesis, war games. You know what I mean? Like it just sounds like that. And I think a lot of composers kind of took this and kind of went with that because it sounds very much like a war score in like a Sega Genesis video game.
Yeah, either Nintendo or Sega Genesis. It certainly feels like something that you would hear in an 8-bit video game because of how simple it is. So I think the score is fantastic. Something that I really appreciate. It's it's funny. I think back about movies from the 1980s and 1990s, and when you get a lot of times with these futuristic movies, is you get a quick voiceover that sets up everything, and you don't need a full movie of setup. I think this is a major problem that we are engaged with right now, is that we are trying to tell all of these origin stories, and sometimes I just want to watch the movie where things are interesting and they're just happening. I don't need to know how New York became a hellscape. Just show me New York as a hellscape and it's fine. It works. I don't need a full movie to explain to me how it got to be this way. Let's just get into the action. That's what this movie does. It doesn't really waste a lot of time. And I feel like if this movie were made today, and my fear is that if this movie ever gets remade or rebooted, that they are going to try to explain in a prequel of some sort how this happened, and it's going to be an enormous waste of time. Because that's not what this franchise, that's not what this movie is. It's about literally escaping someone from New York.
Yeah, I agree on all that. And the voiceover thing is interesting because it sets it up really quick. And then you mentioned like all this exposition. I keep thinking like with the exposition and in today's world they would have filmed another 15 minutes of like I don't know. But you mentioned the prequel thing, and they did that with the thing, and that didn't work at all. So please let's not like prequel John Carpenter movies just for the sake of the Halloween remake in 2007 tried to do that for the first 45 minutes, and I was slightly interested in that more so than the rest of the movie of the 2007 remake. So yeah, I think these origin stories that oh what happened, why did the alien get in the ice and all that stuff, it doesn't really matter. I think you just got to go with it. And like yeah, we get it, it's just the hellscape, and you're right, we don't need to see much. We just got the voiceover, and we know we know that it's some fantasy world anyway, and the idea that hey, New York is an island prison, just go with it, and that's all you need to know.
Well, and I think even when you look at the sequel to Halloween, the 1978 Halloween, and they just called it Halloween, and they did the story where Laurie was, 50 years older and was experiencing a lot of PTSD, and they didn't try to explain Michael Myers. They simplified things in a way that really worked out well. And I think the dialogue in the latest version of Halloween was even better than what John Carpenter was able to do, because I think that the reason that this movie works, it has almost nothing to do with the dialogue itself. It's perfunctory at times. What I think the reason this movie works is because of the performances of the actors and the production design. What the way that they're able to create the look and the ambiance. That is the thing that John Carpenter is able to do so well as a director. I think he has a very particular style. I think that he is able to create an entire world, whether it's a small town in Indiana or whether it is New York circa a bizarro 1997. I think that's the thing that John Carpenter does so well, is to create an atmosphere where whatever is supposed to happen can happen. And I think he casts the appropriate people, and I think that he creates this distinctive look, because I think Escape from New York does have a very distinctive look from even a lot of modern action movies. And I think Snake Plissken himself is an iconic character because of that look, the eye patch, the beard, the black. I mean, it feels so different from what you see a lot of superheroes and even a lot of action heroes from this time period. So I think that's the thing about John Carpenter that works. The screenplay again is I think it is the weakest element, and the parts with where people are talking often are the most uninteresting parts of the movie.
Yeah, and even with a character named Brain, hey, that's me. Um, Still, some of the stuff Brain was saying was just kind of just. It was just like it was someone imagining what a smart person would say in a movie, kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of an example of like the dialogue that John Carpenter is kind of known for. And you kind of mentioned the dialogue in the new Halloween, and in the original Halloween, he had his wife co-write the script, Deborah Hill, or at least the parts where the female characters were talking. You know what I mean, to give it that authentic kind of feel to it. But that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Co-written by Nick Castle, but still, I think they came up with a great concept and the look, and I think they realized, okay, let's kind of minimalize the dialogue and just put like veteran actors in these places where they can take the dialogue and just turn it into something special. And you got that with Lee Van Cleef, and you got that with Ernest Borgnine, and then even with like Isaac Hayes, like I don't know, we're just so used to him as yes, chef from South Park, and he passed away and the whole controversy and whatnot. But I never just saw him as an actor, and you know, and I just thought he was a voice actor and then like a musician. And then when I saw this movie years ago, I was like, damn, he was really good in this. So I don't know, maybe the idea of casting a musician or some kind of non-actor in a role, it's been done before plenty of times, but I think in this case he did the right move because it just made it feel more like this guy's like a fucking hip dude, but he's like he's weird a little bit, but the performance and the way he's talking, but that's just the way that Isaac Hayes talk. So I think the casting of Isaac Hayes was really well done because it just came off like, especially him wearing the sunglasses the whole time, that kind of added to his character.
Yeah, it is an absolute shame what happened to him at the end of South Park, because I think for a lot of people that's how they remember him, is as the voice of Chef and doing kind of the little musical interludes, and then the controversy that surrounded what happened with Scientology and that controversy. And it is a shame that that is in a lot of ways what his legacy is. But I think you do have a movie like this that I think he is very much known for. I think he is also very much known for writing the song, the theme from Shaft is probably the movie thing that he is most remembered for, because that the music is iconic, and Brian is probably humming it to himself right now as I speak. But I think that that is ultimately what he is most remembered for when it comes to cinema. But I think he is very good here, and he gets to die in pretty spectacular fashion. And I love me some Isaac Hayes, and I think he's great. Somebody we have not mentioned is Harry Dean Stanton, and I think he's kind of the straw that stirs the drink, and I really appreciate just the fact that he is a total rapscallion, he is a total scumbag, and I love the scenes where he is interacting with Kurt Russell. I think those two have great chemistry, and the banter back and forth is even reminiscent, I think, what you would see in Marvel movies, where they're just going back and forth and being total smartasses to each other. And we also get introduced to Maggie as well. And I think the movie definitely starts to gain momentum when Harry Dean Stanton comes on the screen. And he's somebody who also has unfortunately passed on, just as almost everybody in this movie has. But Harry Dean Stanton, when you start to see him in this movie, I think it really picks up.
Yeah, like I mentioned, he's brainy, does a great job. Not necessarily his fault, but the idea of just God making gas is that even a thing? Did they just like, I don't know? We're kind of leaning into what doesn't work, but that just made me think of that. But in terms of his performance, he did a great job. And you talk about that banter back and forth. I love that scene where they're in that his house or whatever it is, and just like, don't call me Harold, and he keeps calling him Harold. Classic. Of course, he's gonna keep calling him Harold. Like that's typical back and forth banter that we see in, like you said, Marvel movies today. So he did a good job with that at least. But again, it's just some of the other things he was saying just made absolutely no sense.
We also talked a little bit about Ernest Borgnine as the cabbie, and it's wild to think that he is an Academy Award winner, and he has been in so many movies. I think about even another Trey Parker Matt Stone connection. He was in the movie Basketball, and one of the last performances he did was in ER when he was 90 something years old. It is remarkable to just look at his IMDb. This is somebody who the very first thing that they did was in 1950, and the last thing that he did was in the year 2012. Can you believe that? How remarkable is that? That somebody had that long of a career, and one of his goals was he wanted to do acting until he hit 100. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2012 at the age of 95. But this is somebody who was a working actor from the time that they were like 23 until they died at 95. That is something that's truly remarkable.
Yeah, true legend. And I don't know how they got him, but maybe he was just, at that age, former Oscar winner, probably a lot of people think he's past his prime, and maybe he was, but, some of these actors, as they get older, they just get more tremendous and more tremendous. So, I don't think it's a shame that he kind of got overlooked, but I think John Carpenter was just like, yo, this guy's available. He's an Oscar winner. He fits that role perfectly. He's gonna make the role lighter and make the movie lighter, especially with his presence, because everyone's got this dark, brooding fucking thing going on, and he's like the light of the whole movie. So yeah, credit to him because he's definitely the comedy of the movie. It's pretty obvious that he was going to die. Like, anyone helping Snake pretty much dies at the end of this movie. So the way he went out too, it kind of sucked. I felt so bad every time I see him die in the cab at the passenger seat. He was just trying to be a helpful guy, but is what it is, man. But he did a great job in the movie.
Every time he throws that Molotov cocktail, it makes me laugh every single time, no matter how many times I see this movie.
That's very hard to do because every time I see that too, like the amount of fucking like angle and force to do that, I think I would fucking hit my hand on the fucking cab on the top of the cab, and then it would screw up my. I keep thinking I would hit the top of the cab, and the Molotov cocktail would get fucked up, and then would just land next to the car, and we'd be all fucked. I was like, how? What arm strength to fucking launch that from that angle? It's tremendous.
So something else that works for me is the fight scene, even though it's clunky and even though it's awkward. I love the payoff because it feels like the only way that Snake Plissken can actually win is to stick that end of the baseball bat into his head, and just the way it's not that he even like is laying on the ground, but he's literally just like put on the top over the ropes, and that's just a really creepy visual, and it's a great payoff to that scene because you're like, how is Snake Plissken possibly going to survive this? And it's pretty great how they do that. So you mentioned an enjoyment of Lee Van Cleef. So why don't you talk about his role as Hawk and what he does in Escape from New York and how he kind of moves the plot along?
He's working for the government, the president, whatever. He's the one who's kind of putting the plan together to get the president out, and you don't know whether to trust him or not because he's saying he's going to give Snake his freedom, but then you got to get this feeling that this motherfucker lying to me, and then when he's doing the medical examination on Snake, and then he tells the doctor to put those things in his neck. He tells him that it's like this explosive device that will attach to your bloodstream, and if in 24 hours you don't get the president out, you're gonna fucking blow up or something. Well, not blow up, but you're fucking gonna die with a small charge in your body. And I kept thinking, is this guy lying? The first time I saw this movie, this guy's got to be lying. And then by the end of the movie, it turns out it's true. They weren't gonna kill him if he didn't fucking put that thing on his neck at the end. So he's kind of a untrustworthy bastard, but at the end he offers Nick a job, and you don't know whether to trust this guy or not. But that's kind of his vibe, man. Because in the movies that I've seen him in, the Sergio Leone movies, like I mentioned before, for a few dollars more, especially in that one, at least for the first 90 minutes, you don't know if he's on Clint Eastwood's side. You don't know what side he's on. Is he going to be on his own side? Turns out to be a good guy in that one. But in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, turns out he's just total asshole, thief, bounty hunter. So he can do both. He can be good and bad. So that's why it's really hard to tell what Lee Van Cleef is in a movie, if he's a bad guy or not, unless you read like the synopsis. But because he's got this look where it's like, do I trust this guy? And that was, I think, key to this role because you don't know whether or not to trust this guy, Hawk, who, he wants the president out, but you don't know whether or not he really wants to kill Snake. Is he really this asshole? Is he putting on a front? So I think there was some kind of complexity to that, and then you kind of see it at the end where he gives him the job or offers him a job at the end. I think you kind of saw his true colors where I think deep down he didn't really want to kill Snake. I think deep down he respects him, even though he's a criminal in his eyes, but still. Just a tremendous job because the way Lee Van Cleef looks at a motherfucker, it looks like he's either going to kill you or then all of a sudden just put a smile on his face and then laugh it off.
I think that is a really fascinating way of putting it. And as I was watching this movie, I do this every time I watch this movie. I think to myself, Lee Van Cleef has to be in his 70s. In fact, he was not. He was 55 in this movie, and when he died in 1989, he died at the age of 64. That is a man who, even though he died at the age of 64, it looks like he lived a hard 64 years.
Yeah, and that's playing Western bad guys and smoking probably and everything in between. And I can't help but think,
And he served in World War II, which probably aged him 10 years just being in that war.
well, that too, and credit to him for being a service to the country. But I can't help but think if Tarantino, if he was alive with the Tarantino boom, Tarantino would have had him in a movie. Clearly, he would have been in Pulp Fiction. I can't think of what role, but he would have been in something. He would have been maybe the boss in Reservoir Dogs. I think that connection is deep because he loves him too, and he talks about him, Tarantino. So if you want to go out and see some good character acting and some good eye work, you look at Lee Van Cleef.
For sure. We've talked a lot about what works in this movie. I think for me, what doesn't work. So, the aspect of Kurt Russell's performance that does not work for me is I think it's almost one of those situations where he wasn't totally confident in his ability to kind of, I guess, ham it up, so to speak, because he's playing this with a lot of earnestness that I don't think that you ever get from a modern Kurt Russell performance. And I can't decide if that's a totally good thing or a totally bad thing, because I think even when you watch him in The Hateful Eight, I think he exudes a certain amount of confidence. He's chewing a lot of scenery. I think this is something that you get in a lot of modern Kurt Russell performances is that gaudiness and the expressiveness and the low baritone in his voice, and you even get it in a lot of you get it in all of the Tarantino performances that he gives. And that's what's fascinating to me is that you're not getting that Kurt Russell in this movie at all. And it's unfortunate because I almost wonder what this movie would be like, whether it would be better or worse. But I know that that is the Kurt Russell that I really enjoy. And every time I don't see it in this movie, it strikes me as really strange because this is one of the most important movies of his career.
You kind of get that with Escape from L.A., that more confidence you're talking about. I see what you're talking about, and I think it fits for this, especially at his age. I think a 30-year-old Snake Plissken, he's probably seen some shit, but this is probably his biggest thing that's happened to him so far. And then, of course, the sequel and all that stuff will get even bigger and crazier with all that stuff. But it just feels like that's kind of where he was in terms of this character, or where this character was. So to me, that kind of fits. He does start hamming it up in the sequel, but of course, because that's 13 years, 14 years later. So that makes sense to me. Almost like a parody of himself in that one, but still having fun with it. But I think in this case it fits because that's kind of what this movie needed. And I don't think if you hammed it up too much, I think it would have been too leaning on the ridiculous side. But I think the fact that they kept it at this kind of tone fit with him and what he was doing in the performance.
Fair enough. Like I said, I'm not. I'm unsure. Is more of my observation. I do have to say I think the plot is nonsense. Even though it's funny, the things that I enjoy about this movie are the performances and kind of the visual ambiance. But when it comes down to some of the dialogue scenes and some of the scenes where we're actually talking about the plot, I don't think the movie sings in those moments, and I think that's what prevents me from thinking of this as like an all-time like in my favorite like the movies that I put in my 100 favorite. This is not one of those movies that would come even close because the plot just makes so little sense and the dialogue is not great. And in relation to the plot being nonsense, Donald Pleasant's accent is kind of all over the place, and I think I understand why because he's British and he's playing the American president, and that really doesn't work out for a lot of reasons. So I think those are the things that hold me back, especially the part about the plot and the dialogue. The fact that that doesn't totally click for me, I think is ultimately why I don't see this movie in the same way that I do a lot of other Kurt Russell movies and even a lot of other post-apocalyptic movies in their own right.
Yeah, the plot aspects that are fucking ridiculous. The fact that there's this tape in this briefcase that's supposed to provide all this nuclear information to share with Russia and China. That's how I remember it, and it's very loose on how to read it, but that from what I've read and read up, that's pretty much what that tape was supposed to do. And of course, Snake switches the tapes at the end, and blah blah blah. But of course, they probably just made a copy of the goddamn tape. So when Snake destroys the tape at the end, it probably means nothing because with a highly confidential tape like that, you're gonna make one copy and put it in a briefcase. Come on, you're gonna make copies. So yeah, that was kind of stupid. Especially if it's 1997. You can make so many copies of the tape. Yeah, and then the whole thing about landing on the World Trade Center. I don't know how that logically can happen. I think you would. There's not enough runway. Obviously, I don't think there is. I think you would just fucking land and then fly off the top if that were to fucking happen. So again, cool ideas, but just the execution is thought of like. And then again, the whole thing about, oh, I make gas for the Duke. Like, you can just make gas? Like, did I miss something? Can we make gas?
If we do, I certainly am not the person to be asking this. And When they were landing, were they landing a helicopter? Because a helicopter is something that you can land on the World Trade Center. I don't think you could do like a large plane, maybe even a small plane you can land on there. It was hard to tell the scale of some of the planes.
That was the other issue too, and I guess they had an anchor on that thing, and I don't know, man. Just it was very creative. Let's just say that, but the logic and science behind some of that stuff. Yeah, and then the fact that they had to go down 50 flights of stairs from the World Trade Center, I have no idea how long that would take, but I think that would take a very long time and not like 30 minutes or whatever it took Snake Plissken.
I mean, I don't know. Snake Plissken looks like he's a man in pretty good shape. He went to war, so he might be able to do it. 30 minutes? I mean, I think that's doable.
Yeah, and then Donald Pleasance is the president going down those steps too. I was just laughing at that.
Yeah, maybe that might not be as realistic. I mean, but it is going down the stairs. It's not going up the stairs.
Yeah, it's just a lot of weird stuff in this movie. Like, I kept thinking about the gas too, and then I guess they filled that plot hole with Brain making the gas. But then I thought again, like, why do you just make gas? I don't know. But again, you throw those stuff out the window, and then you just have fun with it. I think you got to just have fun with it at this point because it's like recently I just saw Tenet at a drive-in, and I had to answer so many questions to my friend. I'm just like, bro, at this point, just go with it, and they just went with it and they had fun with it. So I think you got to kind of ignore some of these crazy plot outlines and stuff, and the fact that yeah, the president's British, but again, 1997 alternate universe, we have Donald Trump as president, so who the fuck knows?
That's a good way of putting it. So I think for me, the MVP of this movie is John Carpenter. It has to be the director. He's the one that put this all together, and I think John Carpenter's movies, especially at this point when he is in the prime of his filmmaking career, at this point, with him at the peak of his powers, I think if he's making a movie, then he is the MVP of it. And I would say the same thing if we were discussing the 1978 movie Halloween. I just feel like this is a layup, and if even if it was the score, I could almost make the argument for John Carpenter because of how good it is. But when you combine the score and the production design and the way that this movie is directed, even if the screenplay isn't the best, I still have to give it to John Carpenter for being the MVP of this movie. And without him, and without him and the success of the movie Halloween, I don't think this would even get made. So for those reasons, John Carpenter, MVP.
Hands down MVP. The fact that very few, if anybody, does their own scores now, along with directing and writing their own movies. He's definitely one of a kind, man, and you gotta appreciate his scores. And there's some re-recordings he's done on YouTube. I would check it out. He re-recorded in studio with his son the Escape from New York theme, and even now on a fucking stereo sound, the way he recorded it in his little studio sounds even better. So go check that out if you can.
And despite my reservations, I still think the best performance in this movie is Kurt Russell. It's really hard to give it to any of the other performers because if they're in this movie, then it's only for about 10 minutes. So I really appreciate the fact that you have your Harry Dean Stanton and your Ernest Borgnine and your Donald Pleasance and your Isaac Hayes, and they are great flavorings that are included in this movie, but Kurt Russell is the only person that is in this movie from beginning to end, so I have to give him best performance even with some of the issues that I brought up, because this is a movie that very clearly helped to make his career and turn him into the Kurt Russell that we know and love today.
I guess this is me being biased, but I'm gonna go with Donald Pleasance, and I wasn't gonna pick him. I was gonna pick Kurt Russell like from the start, but then I watched that scene again where he's strapped to the wall and he's nearly pissing himself and he's shaking, and the Duke is like shooting at him randomly, and he's just scared shitless. And I keep looking at that and like, this is the most tense probably scene in the whole movie. And like, it's fucking like, you look at Donald Pleasance's face and he's just fucking scared shitless, and it's just like, it's all over it. So I thought, man, this kind of like raises the stakes a little bit, you know what I mean? So I thought that kind of elevated some things, and that's why I picked him, because I don't know, I felt like he did the overall better acting job than everyone else in this movie.
I think if that is an argument that you can make. I mean, Donald Pleasance is one of the most important aspects of Halloween, and I can see why somebody would want to make the argument for this movie as well. But I just think with everything added together, I mean, for me, it's still going to be Kurt Russell. But I can certainly understand Donald Pleasance and the presence that he adds to any movie. So, Brian, that is all that I have for Escape from New York. Before we talk about and preview next week, anything else you would like to say about Escape from New York? I think I've talked about a little bit. This is not necessarily a classic for me. It is not a must watch every year, but it is certainly very solid. I really enjoy this movie whenever I do get a chance to watch it. For the most part, I just wish the screenplay was a little bit better.
Yeah, I would say check it out on Peacock right now because I was able to watch this on my downtime at work at like 5 in the morning. I watched like the first half, and then I have the Blu-ray at home that I just bought. Collector's edition. It's worth it because the whole other disc is like all these great documentaries that I want to dig into because I'm just fascinated with John Carpenter and the work that he put in and all that kind of stuff especially from the '80s period. So I'd recommend getting the collector's edition if if they're going to take out the movie from Peacock in the next probably couple months because that's the way these streamers are doing it now. But that was very convenient for the time, so check it out if you can on Peacock or Blu-ray. But I'd still say pick up the Blu-ray because it's worth owning. Because like I said, picking up classic movies on Blu-ray and just seeing them now and like all the extra little tiny details and stuff, it especially comes out in Escape from New York, especially like the World Trade Center stuff, like from the top stuff from the top view. It comes off really well on Blu-ray, so check it out.
All right, so what we are going to be doing next week is we have kind of a double episode. We are actually going to be talking about two movies next week, Brian, because as we were planning this month out, we planned to do four movies, but there are only 3 Tuesdays in the month of October that we are doing shows because of Better Call Saul, our most recent episode of Real Bad, where we discussed a season of Better Call Saul. So next week, we are going to be spending a lot of time on my favorite way to travel, Brian. We are going to be spending some time on a train, two different trains, in fact. And I don't know that these are two trains that you want to be on, but they are certainly the ones that we are going to be on next week, as we will be discussing 2013's Snowpiercer and 2016's Train to Busan.
Yeah, I've been waiting to watch Snowpiercer, and I think this is the right moment. I've been wanting to watch it on Netflix for a while, and when they talked about the show or introduced the show and saw the trailer, I was like, okay, maybe this is the perfect time. And then Jerome laid out the plan for the rest of the year, and I was like, perfect. I'm gonna wait till then, and then yeah, it's come to this time, and I'm excited, and I've done some kind of crazy research, and who knows, but maybe Mr. Wolford is Charlie Bucket in disguise.
That may be true, and of course, we will be ending the month by talking about Mad Max in a couple of weeks as well. So we have that to look forward to. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to our show this week. We will return next week again with a double episode on a train.
You're the Duke. You're the Duke. You're A1. You're the Duke. You're the A1 Duke.